Norman J. Warren's Prey is a film which still appears to cause some controversy today. A possible deliberate retelling of D.H. Lawrence's 1922 novella The Fox, Prey concerns a male presence entering the psychosexual ecosystem of a rurally isolated lesbian couple. In this context, the male happens to be a shape-shifting predatory alien. My immediate impression of the film is that it is one of visceral power, challenging emotions, and behavioral ugliness. What I am most confident in stating is admiration for its technical imagination filmically. I love the symmetrical coldness with which the English countryside is depicted, befitting the clinical observation which the extraterrestrial is undertaking. However, this isn't to say the surroundings look uninviting or lifeless. They radiate a warmth, although it reminds me of a certain documentary sterility, matter-of-fact photography, although aesthetically pronounced for television consumption. Pretty, yet mildly unreal. And then the music, provided by one IVOR SLANEY, provoked a particular response in me. Beautiful when in appropriate surroundings, although a sly melancholic key suggests sinister foreshadowing, ominously teasing one for enjoying the beautiful countryside of a sleazy horror picture. But more importantly are the alien sonics, which attack one's ear as the picture's alien assaults his own victims. Psychologically intrusive and melodically insolent, some of the noises composed for this film sound utterly demonic. As a functional formulaic horror film, Prey is absolutely spectacular. As an example of a horror film which tries to be something, quote, more unquote, say elevated horror or proto-elevated horror, Prey's worth is debatable. The reason Prey remains a controversial film to this day is due to its depiction of lesbian relationships. The presence of Mr. Anderson, the alien's disguise, is a handsome manifestation of all the challenges that could potentially delegitimize some ideas of lesbian identity. The apparent fluidity of female homosexuality as opposed to the seeming rigidity of male homosexuality is still a very sensitive topic, and one which I will only touch lightly, as I don't want to make any claims to knowledge I do not have. As a result, Prey's depiction of two lesbians who are separately tested and tempted by a male presence, both affected in distinct yet fundamentally similar ways, can be seen as extremely provocative. If one really wanted to claim that this film questions the existence of female homosexuality, or even reduces it to penis envy, they probably could. Until we get a signed note from Norman J. Warren claiming otherwise, it is vaguely difficult to argue that it does not. I mean, insofar as it presents no alternative. I would sooner suggest that it was more likely that the film was meant to explore challenging ideas related to female homosexuality as opposed to outright ideologically dismissing it. I mean, if they're really against the idea of lesbians and or same-sex female couples, they wouldn't have made this film, period. Then there's two other things which maintain this film's controversial status. Firstly is its depiction of an abusive lesbian couple. Was this meant to be a condemnation of all lesbians, or just a confronting depiction of an inevitable scenario which could occur in female same-sex couples? Most likely it was the latter, although one could at least argue that it plays into stereotypes of, for example, lesbian couples consisting of an abusive dominant and a submissive abused victim. I don't know to what degree that was a proliferated stereotype in the 1970s, although today that dynamic was not unfamiliar to me when I first viewed Prey a couple of years ago, and it reminded me of that cliché stereotype which gets thrown around about same-sex female couples, typically in an attempt to mockingly sadistically dismiss them. Oh, they all have a dominant and a submissive crudeness. But I suspect Prey is more along the lines of, sometimes unfortunately this can happen, as opposed to this is what always happens, if you know what I mean. And then thirdly, and probably most controversially really, is the degree to which this film can be considered exploitative or simply, erotic. Is this film merely cheap sexploitation, its lesbian content existing primarily for titillation, divorced from the reasoning which motivated, say, D.H. Lawrence from penning The Fox? One could certainly think so, given the gratuitous, steamy nature of at least one sex scene between the ladies. However, one has to remember, at this time in history, the 1970s, erotic art and pornography itself were considered valid forms of expression and not inherently exploitative. The ladies who appeared in Jesus Franco's sleaziest slime might have been considered, at one time, empowered revolutionaries as opposed to, well, exploited objects, as they might otherwise be considered. So the question is Prey appealing to lesbianism, fetish culture, and erogenous indulgence out of cynical marketing, or out of an insistence that it is vital, essential to the overall work of art? Exploitative or erotic? In my opinion, it was most likely meant to be both at once. Jesus Franco considered himself an heir to the Marquis de Sade artistically, and this didn't preclude him from being considered a talented auteur. This is to say, Franco's actual sleaze or sexism was not a hindrance to his work being considered of interest, technically, creatively, or thematically. So where 1977's Prey by Norman J. Warren is concerned, I have less belief in his definitive intent as exploitation. One watches enough 1970s exploitation to know the difference, and zero shame in thoroughly enjoying and or wholly admiring it. If it hasn't stopped me from endorsing the works of Jesus Franco, it certainly cannot Norman J. Warren's. So it is evident why 1977's Prey is still considered a controversial film. Either one considers it disgusting male gaze skullduggery, or a challenging, worthwhile, sincere film which seeks to explore the limits of female homosexuality, its parameters, its weaknesses, its less admirable commonalities with heterosexuality. Or heterosexual couples, rather. Being a film initially released in 1977, Prey is one of the oldest films which still retains a degree of controversy related to its place in the ever-disputed territory of public morality. Obviously, films which do not adhere to our contemporary ethics, Birth of a Nation, Triumph of the Will, or even Gone with the Wind, will cause controversy now, but they weren't controversial in their initial context of release. Well, they were, but not across the board as they are today. And rightfully so. Don't get me wrong, Birth of a Nation, admirable film. Triumph of the Will, admirable film. Gone with the Wind is actually the one I don't think is necessarily an admirable film, and that's probably the least evil of the three, all things considered. That's ironic. Anyway. Yeah. Some films were controversial upon release, but are beyond adored nowadays. Take The Wild Bunch, A Clockwork Orange, or even The Exorcist. They've seen reappraisals as undisputed classics, especially now that film violence is no longer considered guaranteed to inspire copycat killers, and the Pope is too busy to go around excommunicating anyone. Thank goodness, I've been a lousy Catholic. The oldest film to my mind that is still considered controversial in this fashion, and it will never not be controversial, is 1971's Straw Dogs. Also relating to reasons of female sexuality, that sequence of Straw Dogs will simply never not be controversial. We'll have reached a consensus on the much lesser seen Prey long before we reach a conclusion on Straw Dogs. Think about it. If a film was released today which shared Prey's premise, a remake or otherwise, it would be very controversial for sure. Oh, you're implying that all blanks are blanks? Oh, people will see this and think that all blanks are blanks even if that's not what your message is. Why do you feel the right to make a film about blanks when you are not a blank? All potentially valid, I'm not even making fun, but all also potentially close-minded. We have to make a distinction between things we want to see handled sensitively in art and media, and things we just don't want to see handled at all by anyone except ourselves. We have to make a decision to be honest. Are we mad at what Prey does, at how Prey does it, why Prey does it, or simply the fact that it exists in the first place? These are all very important clarifications, which get to the root of why and how Prey is controversial. Is it possible to realize a sensitive, tactful version of Prey, or not? I don't have an answer to this question. All I know is that I find this film technically, creatively venerable, and then narratively, emotionally, confronting. But I'm less interested in my thoughts on 1977's Prey. I know them fairly well. What I don't know is your thoughts on this continually divisive film. Do let me know in the comments what you think of this film, if you have seen it. If you haven't seen it, I implore you to check it out if you're so inclined. But more importantly, I implore you to have a spectacular day.